Hi, I'm Dr. Mindy Makian. I'm an associate professor of religious studies at Lenore-Ryan University, where I also serve as the director of the Living Well Center for Vocation and Purpose. The Living Well Center has a speaker series where we ask a variety of cool and fascinating people the question of what it is that makes for a life worth living. And today I have with me Tuhina Verma Rasche, who is an ELCA pastor who is serving University AME Zion Church in Oakland, California?
Palo Alto, actually.
In Palo Alto, California. Sorry, I got that wrong. In Palo Alto, California, as a specialized call. Tuhina has spoken at the ELCA's youth gathering in 2018, and it's just a cool and fascinating person to come and join us today. Tuhina also says that she is someone who likes donuts and seeks the holy in donuts. And so I've asked Tuhina to start today by just talking a little bit about what is it that makes for a life worth living for you?
For me, it is all about a four-letter word when it comes to a life worth living. Yeah. And for me, that four-letter word is love. I think love for me, relationships based in love have really been for me what truly has actually brought me back from the dead. If I'm going to talk about like what resurrection looks like as a person who follows Jesus, love has brought me back from the brink of death. And I don't say that lightly either, for somebody who has struggled with depression and anxiety, that people have literally loved me back to life. And those relationships of people who it's so hard to define the word love as well, because it's like, my favorite example is from Rob Bell's Numa series, where he's like, I love tacos, yet I love my spouse. And using the word love to equate those two things, but really realizing that love-based relationships have just been so much for me and is actually really one of the driving forces of why I do what I do, how I do what I do, and thinking about like the places and the spaces where I've ended up either by God's grace or just sheer accident, or a combination of both. Thinking about that love has just really kept me in this weird institution we call church, has kept me in relationships that have spanned almost the entirety of my life, has really solidified and formed bonds, and has also led to hard truths and needing to also separate myself, walk away from, realizing that some of the relationships I have were not really based in love. And so I think that's really a big part of what keeps me going and what really just makes this life for me worth living.
I know you're involved in a lot of work for social justice, and a lot of that focusing on race relationships, racial justice, Black Lives Matter. How do you experience? So maybe that's not the right way to ask the question, but how do you experience? I'm going to say it that way. How do you experience love in this very fraught and tenuous time in terms of race relations in our country?
I think if the work is rooted in love, for me, like that is what keeps me going, because I think there are, like, as a person of color who's been ordained in a predominantly white church, I get very tired of having to like justify my existence or like explain my existence to white siblings within our denomination. And I think like having that work weigh on me has made me exhausted. And there have been times where it's like, I think I'm done. I'm gonna just walk away. But having this work rooted in love, and I think one of the reasons why this work is so hard right now is because it is rooted in love, and and for me, like, this is rooted in love for neighbor, love for self and love for neighbor. And I think we live in a world where we have really been taught that we have not really been able to love ourselves as God has created us to be. I think we live in a society that asks us to contort ourselves into impossible shapes and forms and positions, where we expect the people around us to also contort. If we've been so deeply contorted and malformed, then I think like it's something that like we kind of inadvertently pass on from generation to generation, in trying to break from that malformation, trying to break from this disfigurement. I think is a time of revelation, is a time of apocalypse. And it's a great unveiling that we're seeing the world as it really is, that we have all been malformed. We have all been asked to contort in these very impossible ways, shapes, and forms, which has actually denied us real relationships rooted in love.
How do we, or I mean, I'm not asking you to have a definitive answer to this question, but how do you think, or what are some ways that you think that we might be able to help with that unveiling? I mean, I like that you use that for apocalypse, because I think that we tend to think of apocalyptic as this horrible, scary, mean thing, and it's not scripturally a horrible, scary, mean thing. It's exactly what you said, an unveiling. But how do we participate in that?
I really think that like it's the unveiling of a new heaven and a new earth.
Right.
Like and yet again, like the term apocalypse has also been contorted to fit the needs of powers and principalities. That apocalypse is like gloom and doom, of like world ending. And yeah, in a way it actually is a world ending, so that a new world can be formed and created. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so hard to answer that question of ways to do it. I'm really a big fan of Adrienne Maree Brown, who's written a book called Emergent Strategy, which is really based on the writings of Octavia Butler. And I was having a conversation with one of my dear friends, and we were calling this love work, of what is it going to look like to create the worlds that we want to live in, where everybody has life abundant, not just us, but our neighbor is also has full access to life abundant. And so what is it going to look like to create those worlds? And I think we also live in a world of grand gestures where things have to be done on a large capitalist scale. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think we've really kind of lost what does it mean to do small and gracious acts in love. And I think about instances of where I think about like Jesus like making mud out of his spit and like putting it over the eyes of the man who couldn't see. And it wasn't a grand spectacle. Like, I think it was just really from the dirt of the earth, from like, you know, from who God created us to be, is what led to this man who couldn't see now being able to see. Mm-hmm. And so I also think that small acts done full of love, I think can really move people, move mountains, move ways and shapes of being. And I think like if many people do these small acts together in community and do it lovingly, that can lead to such a change that can really change the trajectory of a person's life. And if you change the trajectory of one person's life, you have the possibility to change the trajectories of so many different people as well.
I think I told you this on a Facebook, in response to a Facebook post once, but one of the small gestures that you do regularly that has made a difference, and maybe not immediately, but over time for me throughout COVID, has been your, I guess, nearly daily reminders to inhale and exhale and just breathe.
Yeah. And I think part of it was, especially earlier on in the pandemic, when COVID was really related to respiration, issues of breathing. And I really think about the beginning of Genesis, where God breathed life into creation, where God had breathed life into humanity. And we're living in a time where Some of us are just holding our breath because we're so tense because we don't know what the next minute's going to bring. There are, like my childhood best friend has COVID, and she's recovering from COVID. And she has had to be hooked up to oxygen because her respiratory system has just been so weakened because of COVID. I also truly believe in co-conspiracy. Like, what does it mean to breathe together? And so for me, co-conspiracy is also really important. And so what does it look like if we together as a collective, as a community, take that time to pause, to inhale, to exhale, and to repeat, and to really think about, like, why are we breathing? Why are we doing? And then that kind of, like, for me, gets around to the question that you asked at the beginning, like, what is a life worth living? And for me, it's like the love that God has breathed into me. As a follower of Jesus, I feel called to continue to breathe so that other people can also breathe freely. Particularly in this time of racial uprisings, where there has been a constant call within Black Lives Matter, where people have been extrajudiciously killed by the police, where they have told people literally on their necks, I can't breathe. And so what is it going to look like for us to make sure that each and every single one of us can breathe freely, wholly, and collectively? And
Wow,
so yet again, that's rooted in love. And so I think that was really a part of the daily devotion for me to put that out there, was that it's not just for me. And it's not just for the person reading it, but what is it going to, what would it be? What could it be if we could just take that collective breath together freely?
how would you, that's really beautiful. I like the idea of a collective breath. I wonder what that looks like. So what does that look like, for example, on a small liberal arts university campus? What does the collective breathing for the sake of justice for all, so that all might breathe? What does that start to look like on our campus?
I think for me, it's really looking at where your sense of call is. Like, what gets you up in the morning? What motivates you? What inspires you? What compels you? Mm-hmm. And I don't think, I really love, I also really wrestle with the writings of St. Paul because, you know, dude was a dude. But at the same time, I also really love what he talks about: an ear cannot be a foot, cannot be an eye. That in this way, we all love and support one another in what calls us and what compels us for life abundant for ourselves and for our communities. Mm-hmm. And how do we care for and support one another in that collective breath? Mm-hmm. And so part of the work that I do right now is actually trying to figure out, like, how to build communities of people who are formed by their faith, not necessarily, you know, they don't have to be Christian, but they have to identify in, like, some basis of faith, whether that be Hinduism or Judaism or Christianity or Islam. Mm-hmm. And what does that, and how does their faith compel them to move and to help shape new worlds? And what are those acts going to look like in order to shape those new worlds? And I am really moved by artistic expression. Like, I really believe that art has the power to move, literally and figuratively. Like reading words, seeing pieces, hearing spoken pieces, like experiential or like godly play, can really compel us and can compel our neighbors. It can compel us in different ways to figure out, like, what really inspires us, what really engages us, and what really gets us to move. And I think particularly, like, within, like, a college environment, thinking about, like, you know, it's actually through campus ministry that I became a follower of Jesus. And so I have so much respect for campus ministry and work that is done on campuses, not just for faith formation, but for vocational formation. What calls people to do what they do, not just professionally, but like in the course of their daily life. I think about people who are also like not necessarily in liberal arts, but that work in the sciences or that work in business administration.
Mm-hmm.
And really thinking about like, what is it in their professions that gets them out of bed in the morning? What inspires them? What compels them? And who loves them to do this? Who loves them into this work? Who loves them into this vocation? And who loves them into this being? Because I really believe that love is a communal work.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an individualized work, especially in a capitalist society where we're told like, you know, you can, if you like, you know, put in your elbow grease and if you do the hard work, then it's all up to you. And it's actually, you know, it's really like in the basis of community where we love one another into life and love one another into the wholeness of our being. Like, I think that I would not be a woman of color pastor in the ELCA were it not for the people who created the way for me to be here.
Right.
And so for me, it's also about the love of the communion of the saints, that what they have lived through and done and endured. And that pathway was created in love so that I could be here. And then I think about like, well, what are the ways in which love leaves a legacy, that the people who come after me, whether they be ordained or lay, but like feel a deep call to what they do and feel a deep call to who they want to be. How do we create pathways for them rooted in love?
That's beautiful. Thank you. As you're saying that, one of the thoughts that just popped in my head, and I'm sure you're aware of it, but just lifting up that you wouldn't be an ordained pastor in the ELCA as a woman of color. There's so many things about that that are true. Had it not been for other people who had loved the way for you, had loved you into it. And then as we're sitting here and you're saying that, this is the year that had COVID not been such an interrupting factor, we would be celebrating the 50-40-10 anniversary of ordination of women in the ELCA, women of color in the ELCA, and members of the LGBTQIA community. And so just recognizing that all of us are always following on the footsteps of those who came before us in so many ways that we might not be aware of.
Yeah, and I think about the love of the communion of saints.
Yeah.
And for me, like the communion of saints is actually something that really just calls to my heart, is that it is about present, future, and past.
Right.
It's not just about the people who have come before. It's also about us who are here today, and for those who are to come. And that's all deeply rooted in relationships.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your insights and wisdom with us. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I really appreciate this.
Thank you very much.